Tonight on Free Minds TV, we talk about a man in North Carolina who died after being tasered on his bicycle. We'll also be discussing how Knoxville is being sued for ending enforcement of right turn on red at stoplights. Plus, we have a couple of updates from the internet. That coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
Thank you very much for tuning in to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you as always is Toby.
And Nick.
And we just passed Thanksgiving, getting on into the holiday season, Nick, so I hope everybody's doing well. Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
I did.
You know, I did have to work over the Thanksgiving break, but I did get to see my family a little bit. And my brother told me a joke. Would you like to hear it, Nick?
I assume you want me to hear it.
I would love to tell you the joke. All right. So there's this politician. I don't care if you like Democrats, pretend he's a Republican. If you like Republicans, pretend he's a Democrat. So this works for both parties. A politician, he dies. He goes up to the pearly white gates and he says, "Did I get into heaven?" St. Peter says, "Well, you know, we don't get a lot of politicians around here, so we're going to give you a choice." And he goes, "Well, I choose heaven, of course. Everybody wants to go to heaven." He goes, "Well, it's not that easy. You can't just get into heaven. You have to spend a day in heaven and you have to spend a day in hell." So he says, "Okay, well, I guess I'll spend a day in hell first and then see what that's like and then go up to heaven, spend a day there, and then I'll make my decision." He says, "That's the way it's done." So he goes down to hell and it's wonderful. Nothing like what he expected. He's playing golf all day. He's sipping martinis. He's living the same life he lived as a politician, you know, the high life. Has a great time, schmoozes it up with all the bigwigs down there, and well, it's a grand old time. And he gets back up and he says, "Man, I think I want to go to hell. I'll spend my time there." He goes, "No, not yet. You got to spend the day in heaven first." So goes up to heaven and he does the typical church stuff. He goes to church, prays. He lives a moral day up in heaven. It's not so bad. I mean, I guess I could live here, but if I have the choice between that or going back down to hell and playing golf and drinking martinis and living the life poolside, well, that's what I'm going to do, of course. He says, "Okay, eternity in hell it is." So he goes down to hell, and it's a barren wasteland. It's horrible. Nothing like it was the day before. There's fire, there's brimstone, and, well, it's a lot of suffering down there. He goes to the devil and he goes, "What happened? I was here yesterday. What happened? It was wonderful. We were playing golf, sipping martinis. What changed?" And the devil goes, "Oh, well, yesterday we were campaigning." Yeah. I'll be here all night. All right.
I guess it's relevant for those of us in New Hampshire and Iowa.
The campaign is here, and they're making lots of promises. I'm not going to believe them, though, Nick.
Grinds along.
Yes, it does. Anyways, we do have a lot of show content to be getting into today. We have a couple of updates, one about the internet and stop online piracy, as well as one about pepper spray. We'll be also getting into the use of tasers and how that killed someone, as well as an article about internet cameras and companies that make a lot of money off them. But first, I want to talk about pepper spray. We talked about this, the UC Davis use of pepper spray last week, and showed the video where the police officers were just dousing nonviolent protesters with pepper spray because they were locking arms and sitting in the way and in the sidewalk, and police didn't like that, so they doused them with pepper spray. And you know what? People are pretty upset about that, and I say for good reason. To me, it looks pretty horrific. Just sitting there, essentially with a fire extinguisher full of pepper spray and spraying it all over.
That's the base they use on bears.
Oh.
And they ran out of one, so they had to use another.
Well, they've got plenty of them. Don't worry, Nick. This is standard issue for a lot of police departments now of issuing this stuff, I guess. I didn't know that. I thought they just had the little guys. But a lot of police departments, I guess, have these big old things of essentially bear mace. But so I guess it's gotten some people thinking. It stirred up the pot. Some people are like, well, what's up with the use of pepper spray? This is coming from Wired.com. When pepper spray became a mainstream law enforcement tool in the 1990s, it was hailed as a relatively peaceful alternative to harsh physical violence. But as demonstrated by the routine spraying of Occupy Wall Street activists, culminating in the horrific assault at the University of California, Davis, pepper spray can too easily become a tool of first and excessive resort. Skipping down the article here, I'll post it up on freemindstv.com under the show notes. skipping down to some of the highlights of this. Indeed, while law enforcement scholars unanimously acknowledge that, on per violent incident basis, pepper spray results in fewer injuries than direct physical violence, research suggests that having pepper spray could lead to higher numbers of violent incidents. In one analysis, criminologists found that police use of force rose 33% in Concord, North Carolina, following the approval of pepper spray as a law enforcement tool. After an arrestee, however, died in custody after being sprayed, pepper spray use was restricted. Use of force incidents fell by 57%, despite the fact that arrests rose by almost 4%. Quote, this suggests that the use of spray may not necessarily be an alternative to force, but provides officers with options to use more force, perhaps unnecessarily. In other words, if it's there, they will use it, wrote studies co-author criminologist Paul Friday and Richard Lum of the University of North Carolina. Two studies conducted in the Netherlands showed that pepper spray was useful for subduing violent subjects, but actually caused non-violent situations to escalate into violence. And about 10% of all uses were carried out against non-violent subjects. In 2010, Police Quarterly Review of Taser Use and Safety, Alpert and University Miami criminologist Roger Dunham recommend rigorous studies of how carrying tasers changes threat perception in police. The same studies could also be carried out on pepper spray. Understanding the psychology of policing is also very important, said Dunham. In their culture, it's important to have authority. Most policemen will say that the only thing they have to protect them is authority, and they're very sensitive to people who do not respect their authority. We've talked about that a lot. Police like to have their authority respected. If you're sitting there and I give you a lawful order to move and you lock arms, is that resistance? A lot of people would say no. A lot of people would say yes, especially a lot of police officers. About 45% of UC police agencies now allow pepper spray to be used in response to passive resistance, like that seen in UC Davis. Quote, you don't need the level of pain of a taser hitting with a baton or pepper spray, said Albert. In many ways, we should go back to some of the older, more traditional ways of dealing with people. If you can't talk reason with them, and you're having legitimate authority to use force, you can start slow and see what's going to happen. Use brains, not brawn. I don't know. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, well, I think we've definitely seen police use tasers and pepper spray a lot more than I think they would if they still had to beat you with a baton or sick the dogs on you, or even hitting people with water cannons isn't particularly popular after. I mean, a lot of people still associate that with busting up civil rights protests back in the 1960s. Frankly, I don't much care for the police, regardless of how they're going to beat, assault, molest, maim protesters. I'm not really big fans of them doing it in the first place.
Molest?
But there's multiple connotations to the word.
Okay.
I'm not a big fan of them doing it, period, although I do think that the use of tasers and pepper spray probably do give them an incentive, whether it's conscious or not, to use them a lot more, and because they are perceived to be
that word
harmless.
Right there, I think, is important. I like this quote. Understanding the psychology of policing is also very important. I think it is. I think understanding that there's a lot of psychology that goes into a situation. Police officers are taught when they get on the scene, they need to take control.
Well, they
and
do,
if people aren't respecting their authority,
right,
they don't have perceived control. If they have a weapon such as bear mace, well, that's how you take control, right?
Well, I suppose you could just launch into it with bullets, too, if you wanted to. I mean, the fact is you can control people. If you need to take control of a situation and there's no threat, I mean, I don't think we're really talking about situations where a danger is posed to an officer. I mean, it makes sense that if somebody's wielding a knife or, is in a dark alleyway, doing something suspicious and there's a good potential they have a weapon, and the officer actually has a fear for their safety. I don't think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, in those cases, using
right,
pepper spray and tasers, studies have shown that they work. They're a very good tool for law enforcement, right, as a less violent alternative.
Right, but there's a lot of ways you can take control of a situation where people just aren't complying, and frankly, they're going to face threatening them with a resisting charge might be one way, and just through verbal commands and the way you issue them, that has a pretty significant effect on the way people behave, especially if you've got the can of mace there. I mean, do you have to pull it out and use it right away? Might you try to avoid using it?
He showed it to the crowd first. He held it up to the crowd and showed them what he was going to do.
Yeah, lovely. Spraying down masses of college students who aren't really doing anything dangerous or wrong.
I say
that's exactly what we need it for, right?
All those college students, they're not like some of the occupiers. They've all got meal plans, and they're going to get hungry. So waiting them out and waiting until they go into the dining room and use their meal plan when they get hungry, because they're not going to want it to go to waste, Nick. It's going on either mom or dad's credit card or student loans they'll have to pay back later. So that would be using the brains.
Well,
instead of the
they
brawn,
also
I
weren't
think.
blocking the entrance to a hospital or something like that where there was an imminent danger to anybody. I think the police just felt like, well, we're not amused with your protest and we're going to mace you because we can just say, well, you have to move, and if you don't, we can mace you. I mean, if I walked up to the protest, Toby, and I wasn't very amused with their protest and I did the same thing, the police would probably have me arrested, don't you think?
Yeah, well, they probably should. That would be assault. Yeah, I'm surprised that 45% of law enforcement agencies out there have approved of the use of pepper spray in response to passive resistance. That's a lot, 45%. When it was first introduced, it was supposed to be a relatively peaceful alternative to the batons, to the beating down of violent suspects who were either resisting arrest or posing some kind of a threat or danger. And now almost half of police forces out there are saying, no, use this to make people comply. It's troubling, though it's not quite as troubling as the use of some tasers, because while there have been some deaths by pepper spray, they're few and far between. I guess one could argue the same about tasers, but they're far more common. At least a few every single week seem to pop up on the internet of people dying when they were tasered. A lot of the time, they were being passive themselves. I guess this story you've got, though, he's not being passive. He's actually riding a bicycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's not just sitting, though.
A 61-year-old.
Very dangerous.
A 61-year-old Halifax County man died Tuesday, a day after police shocked him with a stun gun while he was riding his bike, family members said. Scotland Lake Police Chief Joe Williams said they received a call Monday night about a man who fell off his bicycle and injured himself in the parking lot of the BB&T Bank. The caller was concerned that the man was drunk, and an officer arrived at the scene, saw Roger Anthony pedaling away. He followed him in the police car, briefly put on his sirens and lights, and yelled at the man for him to stop. Williams said Turner then saw Anthony take something out of his pocket and put it in his mouth. At that time, Turner got out of the car and yelled for Anthony to stop. When Anthony did not stop, the officer used a stun gun on him, causing him to fall off his bike. Anthony was transported to Pitt County Memorial Hospital, where he was declared brain dead, according to his sister.
Oh, he's not dead? He's just brain dead?
Well, I think they pulled the plug after brain activity had stopped, because that basically means you're dead. You're done living in any kind of a useful way. But apparently he was, the man who died was disabled, suffered from seizures, and was pretty close to death. He had very serious trouble hearing. She said he was riding his bike home from her house on Sunday night. The man who died lived alone in an independent living community.
Oh, he could have. See, my brains over brawn here, right. If I was that police officer, would be I could follow him home. He's on a bike. I'm in a car. He's not going to get away. He's also severely disabled, I guess. I guess the police officer didn't know that, though. He could have followed him home and then subdued him without shocking him with a taser. Would that be too unreasonable? I guess that police officer probably has really important matter to get to, and can't just waste his time following someone on a bike.
The other issue here is that he was trying to get his attention by auditory means, and the man was apparently deaf, which we do hear these stories come up quite a bit. A good first step would have at least been to make eye contact and motion to somebody to pull over, because you never really know what state somebody's in. I mean, there are people out there who are deaf, who are blind, in some cases we've talked about diabetics being tasered because police officers thought they were drunk and non-compliant when in fact they had been driving and their sugar got too low or too high, and they started to go into some kind of a diabetic emergency, which makes you act somewhat similar to how you would act when you're drunk. So they were just out of it because they were diabetic, and they ended up getting tasered.
Does that help their diabetes?
I don't think electric shocks really do much for diabetes one way or the other, but it's probably not healthy for you to have that kind of voltage pass through your body. I mean, some people do die. They just die flat out from the use of the taser. Well, it's unclear to me. He was pronounced brain dead. It's unclear whether he was on a bike. I mean, it doesn't say whether he wore a helmet or not. He may have fallen and just smacked his head, and that may have been. I mean, it may not have been directly from the voltage of the taser.
Oh, I see.
But regardless, unfortunately, he died. So, well, I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter, does it? Dead is dead.
Once again, doesn't sound like he was posing much of a threat at the moment. And I think that's the key issue here. Every single story we talk about, people dying with tasers, it usually, the reason they're picked up by the media is because those people are getting injured when they weren't posing an actual danger to society.
Yeah, because who cares? I mean, if it's a crackhead wielding a knife and threatening people, then, well, if he dies, too bad, so sad. I mean, you know, I suppose they were nice in trying to use the taser so that he might, it was a lot less likely that he would die in the first place, right? So,
Too bad, so sad.
Well, right. I mean, frankly, who cares about a crackhead wielding a knife?
His family.
Dangerous, awful person. Well, maybe they do. Maybe. Maybe they're relieved.
It's very sad, Nick. I'm sad by the whole concept.
It's a sad event regardless when somebody loses their life, but you know what I mean.
Oh, yes, I do know what you mean. Well, I guess
it's kind of whether it's their fault or whether they bear most of the responsibility for that happening. Yeah. Crackhead wielding a knife. Probably guilt. You know, they're not exactly an innocent in that whole thing.
Sure. Anyways,
old man riding a bike, a little bit different than a crackhead wielding a knife, don't you think?
Well,
different way you should deal with that situation.
I believe so, but I guess it depends the psychology of the police officer. We must, according
to
they
did say the officer in this case had only been on the force for 1 month.
A rookie.
Maybe he was just overzealous or unsure of how to handle it.
Maybe that's what they're teaching him. I don't know. Have you been to the police academy? Is that what they
have
teach
I been
nowadays?
To the police academy?
Yeah, you look like someone who went through the police academy.
No, I have not been through the police academy.
No? All right. Well, I haven't been. Maybe that's what they teach people to do nowadays.
I'm too short to be a cop.
Really? I've seen some pretty short cops.
Yeah, I'm too short to be a statey anyway.
Anyways, okay. Well, you could be a town cop.
I guess I could.
Moving right along.
I don't think they'd hire me, though.
No, not after this show. Moving right along. Let's go back and talk about a story we brought up last week, which was the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protect IP Act, two federal bills that are sailing right on through the House and Senate, likely to pass, hopefully won't. Those two bills, what they have in common is they would essentially change the face of the internet as we know it. They would allow the U.S. government, and then it would be copied by every other government in the Western world, essentially. They would allow them to censor any sites they didn't like or any sites that were accused of putting up protected links, having comments that users post protected links. Say you have a Facebook, for example, they would have to edit every comment on there in case one of the users put up a link of of copyrighted material, say to download an illegal MP3, or the link to some offshore's website where you can download or stream a movie that's not licensed properly. What they would do is, we showed the video last week, so I say go watch the video from last week or go onto our show notes and click on the video. It shows a really brief synopsis of what the legislation is intended to do. It's intended to protect copyright laws. What it would actually do is it would stifle free speech, it would stifle small business, and it would really propagate some big old companies while doing absolutely nothing to stop illegal downloading, because, well, the pirates are going to do what the pirates are going to do no matter what the government and everyone else does. You could still download movies using IP addresses, and trust me, those internet hacker people, they're always going to find ways around this stuff, as it seems that they're doing. It looks like there has been all sorts of talk this week about what people would do if SOPA and Protect My IP actually passed. Users of social news community site Reddit.com don't like the way the government seems to be muscling in on the internet. So they plan to build a new one. This coming from Forbes.com. Redditors, as they're called, have flocked over the last week to a new subgroup of Reddit.com they're calling Darknet Plan, or sometimes Meshnet, as the name still seems to be in flux. I guess they haven't decided what they're going to call it quite yet. The aim is to build a mesh of web-based internets that wouldn't be subject to the control of any corporation, government, with the focus on anonymity, peer-to-peer archiving, and strong resistance to censorship. Chris Bursey is a 17-year-old Vermonter who founded the project and goes by the name Wolf Eater on the site Reddit. Breezy, a high school senior, created the Darknet plan more than a year ago, but he attributes the sudden spike in its interest to the Stop Online Piracy Act and awareness of possibilities of government censorship. Essentially what the mesh networks are is it's a peer-to-peer networking networking mesh-up of computers. They don't have to go to an internet service provider. It's computers just simply talking to one another. So there's no Time Warner Cable or any of those internet service providers that currently people connect to. Remember the dial tone? It was like all that stuff. Now it's the cable companies or a satellite dish. You go to your service provider and then it connects to computers from their different servers around the world. What this mesh network or darknet plan would do is it would just allow people to directly connect to other computers using every other computer as this big old mesh network that they're all connected together. While some people say it sounds crazy and it will never work, it currently is working in some parts of the world. What was that? They would piggyback on the current infrastructure to connect places that are far apart, because this would mainly work in big cities where clusters of computer are locally connected, and then they would use some internet providers to connect them around the world, they say. Who knows if it would work, but they say that it currently is. What is that? Here it is, one laptop per child program. That thing they're doing over in Africa where you send the laptop and instead of having an internet, since they don't have it over there, they connect to each other directly on computers. So it is possible. Who knows? We'll see as the internet is cracked down on by the government, which will happen, whether it's Stop Online Piracy or another bill. It will happen. They will shut it down. It is too good to be true. The Wild Wild West will no longer be there, but there's a plan in the works for if it happens.
Yeah, and I think whether it's this plan or not, Toby, we'll probably see technologies or networking developed around that problem. People who actually know what they're doing in setting up computer networks are pretty savvy. They've done some pretty amazing things. I mean, if you consider the fact that 20 years ago, just 20 years ago, there really was no internet as far as a normal person was concerned. I mean, maybe if you worked at certain universities that did a lot of research, maybe back then in 91, 92, you had some exposure to the internet. But the internet hasn't even really been around for 20 years. And in that span of time, we went from dial-up service where you could, it took forever in some cases to load a page with some text and a couple of very simple graphics, to now, I mean, you can stream, video anytime you want.
HD video.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I mean, you can, in some cases, if you've got the right kinds of connections, you can move an entire movie, an entire file the size of a feature-length film in a few seconds if you've got the right equipment. So it's amazing when you think about what they've done. And now we've got wireless networking, we've got internet in cell phones, which most people didn't have 20 years ago either. So I'd be very surprised if 20 years from now we were still relying on IPs and the same, ISPs and the same infrastructure that we've relied on up till now.
Yep.
I mean,
well, especially if the government continues to crack down, because if there's one thing that the builders of the internet, those techie people that are watching this and going, "What are you talking about? You've got it all wrong." I think I have some kind of a concept, but I'm sure I'm totally screwing it up. All those people that create all this stuff, they really like the freedom on the internet. That's what it's like their bread and butter. That's what they like. They don't like the government censorship and all that stuff. So they'll find ways around it.
The government taxes, let's face it. I mean, a lot of commerce takes place online, and we've heard states like California and others trying to crack down, and certain countries trying to crack down because they don't like it. They miss out on tax revenue that takes place online. Frankly, the other side of that coin is that if it weren't for the internet, a lot of that economic activity would not be taking place in the first place. I mean, having that kind of, to some extent, up until recently, relatively unregulated government-free zone, all in all, it's led to a lot of innovation, entirely new business models, entirely new industries. It's really one area of the economy that has experienced real growth, Toby. Over the last 10 years, there's been enormous growth in the internet. 10 years ago, we didn't have YouTube or Facebook or any of these things.
On the backs of blockbusters and Borders, Nick. All right. Speaking of people being upset about...
You have to evolve.
Yeah, I guess so. Speaking of people having to evolve, it's the red light cameras. You know, it's okay to turn right on red, right?
In some states.
In some states, at least here in New Hampshire it is. Other states are starting to see the light. They're starting to see, why are we making people sit through a red light when they could easily stop and then turn? What? Why?
I hate states where you can't take a right on a red.
I just say I'm traveling with my laws, kind of like a diplomat. That's what they do, right? They have to travel around. Wherever I am, whatever I do in New Hampshire is legal wherever I go. I'm a tourist, gosh darn it. I'm here to bring you money into your economy. Why are you giving me tickets?
I travel with my laws too, because I never know which states are right on red and which aren't. Apparently, up until recently, Tennessee was a state where you were not allowed to take a right on red. However, municipalities there were disappointed in August when Attorney General Robert J. Cooper Jr. shot down the argument that a statute did not apply to, a statute that was passed legalizing right turns on red did not apply to existing contracts, writing that the parties have no vested right in a particular level of revenue. Well, why would contract law come into a discussion about whether or not it's legal to turn right on a red light in the state of Tennessee?
Why, Nick?
Well, the reason that contract law comes into it, Toby, is that apparently the government, at least in Knoxville, Tennessee, and probably in some other places in the state, but they're focusing in on Knoxville here, have contracts with a private company called American Traffic Solutions, or ATS. So a private company actually sets up these cameras at red lights. They have these in some places. A lot of our viewers probably in northern New England are kind of confused. But they do set up cameras at red lights, which are supposedly able to distinguish as to whether you came right up to the stop line or whether you crossed it. And this presents a problem for ATS because now that you're allowed to go right on red, well, you kind of have to prove that somebody didn't turn right after the fact. And you can't issue a ticket if they did, which cuts into their revenues. So what they're saying here is that the state of Tennessee is not allowed to change the law, or that Knoxville is liable because the state of Tennessee changed the law because it violates their contract with the city.
Well, it's hogwash, Nick. It's craziness. Anyways.
Now, if I have a contract to have you killed, Toby, if I don't like something you said on the show, or one of your jokes didn't quite go over well with me, and I hire a hitman, that's illegal.
I agree, Nick. But you know what? Lawyers will be lawyers, and it doesn't really matter. They've got the law on their side. That's going to do it for us, freemindstv.com. In the meantime, send us some money or something. We'd appreciate it. Have a good night.